Every person's story has something to teach us. How others view life, how obstacles are overcome, how joy is felt, how fears are faced, how love is expressed. The Matters of Faith podcast explores individual stories of people's lives and how faith plays a part. It may not be your story, but it may help shape yours. And now, Matters of Faith with your host, Jay Wilburn.
This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. In just a moment, I'm going to have S.A. Cosby on, a great crime writer. Before I talk to him, I'm going to talk about him a little bit. Has two books out that I love very much, My Darkest Prayer and Blacktop Wasteland. I like to take credit for telling everybody I knew about My Darkest Prayer. Then Blacktop Wasteland comes out just as good, and everybody else jumped on board. So I'm very proud of that. Not that I'm taking full credit for it, but that I wasn't wrong about him being a great writer, and other people got to see it too. I'm very excited about some recent developments in his career that I want to talk about, but then also kind of want to dig into his past, because I have a feeling he draws from a lot, considering how strong his characters are. If you are interested in advertising on the Matters of Faith podcast, you can email me at mattersoffaith@jwilburn.com. Rates are very reasonable because I'm just trying to cover hosting. Once I take over the world, rates will definitely go up, so you want to get in before that. So I'm looking forward to sharing your passions with my audience, and looking forward to the interview we're going to start here in a moment. And now we'll get into the rest of the program. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 192. My guest today is going to be S.A. Cosby. So I want to welcome him to the show now. Welcome, Mr. Cosby.
Man, thank you for having me. This is great. I really appreciate it.
I look forward to talking to you. We're good friends, I think, and kind of go back a ways. And I really am excited about everything that's happening with you, partly just because I'm a reader and I love what you're putting out there, but also loving that it's getting some traction too. It is sort of a faith podcast, but we kind of focus more on like how each individual's journey kind of led them to where they are. So just kind of starting out on the topic of faith, was your family particularly religious or spiritual around you as you were growing up?
Oh man, I've talked about this on other programs, and ironically, I've talked about it to people in bars. But my family was very religious growing up. Just to give you a little background on my personal life, when I was 6, my mom and dad. Well, let me go back, because my early years are like some country songs. When I was 6, the mobile home that my mom and dad and me and my brother shared burned down, and then. My mom, unfortunately, she has a spinal cord injury, so she became partially disabled. And then her and my dad split up, and we ended up moving in with my grandparents. Now, my grandmother was 100% dyed in the wool, church twice a day on Sunday, Southern Baptist, and almost. I would say our church at that time leaned very closely to the Pentecostal faith. So Growing up, our church choir had a bass guitar and drum kit and keyboards. And I was very much a part of that Southern Gothic style religious experience. I remember people in our church in their 70s and 80s running up and down the aisle and doing cartwheels and catching the Holy Ghost. So I was a big part of that. And over the years, I drifted away from, I like to say, I don't go to church, the building anymore, but I still believe in church, the entity, And so what was the beginning of my, spiritual journey to finding a place where I felt comfortable was I didn't like the way some leaders of different churches that we were visiting with or going to behaved. I didn't like the way they treated people. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, like I said before, my mom was now she's completely disabled as she's gotten older, but at the time she was partially disabled. And so she used to walk with a cane, and we would go to different church meetings, church services, where, they would lay on hands and more than once, they would tell my mom to her face, you don't have enough faith, and that's why you're not healed,
Mm.
and stuff like that. And so, even as a little kid, as a little feisty, big-headed 7-year-old, I would get irritated because I was very protective of my mom. And so, what eventually, really, two things happened that really pushed me away from the church for a long time. One, I don't know if you're familiar with this gentleman. I think he's passed away now, but there was a really famous faith healer named Ernest Angley.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, especially in the South. In the South, he was very famous in the South, and he came to our state, and we didn't have a lot of money. We had a really bad car. One of those cars that if you ever lend it to somebody, you have to give them a list of instructions.
Yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, to speed this along, we went to that event, and they kept passing my mom over. And what you learn later on is why I became fascinated with magic and con men and crime. Is what you learn later on is like there's a lot of plants in the audience, and so my
Yeah,
mom
yeah,
obviously wasn't
yeah.
a plant, so they passed her over. And then the second thing that happened when I was 14, there was a church elder who got it sounds like again a country song,
Yeah.
but he got three different women in the church pregnant at the same time, and it just really did something to me. It really shook me to my core, because the minister before that we had, the minister that baptized me as a kid, was a very strong person that I admired a lot. And when he decided to step down because of health reasons, he was an older gentleman, and we had this new minister, and it really shook me for a long time. And so, of course, then at 14, I'm reading everything I get my hands on, and I think we're maybe roughly the same age. So I came of age in the 90s. So I was a grunge to wannabe kind of goth kid, and
Yeah.
I'm reading Kerouac like a lot of people did on the road, and Albert Camus, and I'm becoming very, so intellectual. I think I was the only person among my friends that actually finished Infinite Jest, and so I kind of had this idea of like, it's like I was like, well, I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. There's no religion. There's no spirituality. There's no wizard in the sky, and so on and so forth. And then, when I graduated high school, I went to college. I went to college for 2 years, and I had to drop out because of financial reasons. Also, my mom was getting a little worse, and what ended up happening was about the year after that, she got a little better, and she and I had a falling out. I already had a falling out with my dad from him being in and out of my life, and him and my mom having issues. And then me and my mom had a falling out about going back to college, and so I did a Jack Kerouac thing. I jumped up, got a bus ticket, and went to New Mexico. And in New Mexico, I met some folks who were sort of in an agnostic type of faith. I mean, they were. I met some people from the Unitarian Church,
Okay.
and so and they were very very casual Unitarians,
Yeah.
blue jeans type of folks. But what it did for me was start me on a path to where as today as a 47-year-old man, I don't ascribe to any particular religion. I ascribe to an idea of that there's good and there's evil, there's kindness and there's cruelty, and whatever you call it, whether it's Yahweh, Jesus, Allah, Zoroaster, that there are things outside of our ability to perceive. And I think that if you do the best you can and be a good person and try not to be a jerk to people, that you're helping that positivity spread. But if you ask me to nail it down, I guess I'm a Christian agnostic. So sorry for that long answer. That's a long
No,
way to
it's
get there. I
fine. It's fine.
apologize
That's
for
why
that.
we're here, is to talk through this stuff. Um, Now, obviously, we're going to get to your writing because that fascinates me a good bit. But looking still at your past, one thing that comes through in your writing is the very odd contradictions of life. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
there's particular contradictions that are a part of poverty. There's contradictions that
Mm-hmm.
are a part of being in the South. There's contradictions when you're a person of faith, and then you even mentioned some in your experience there where the elders are getting women pregnant, and the
Mm-hmm.
faith healers are the best con men and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
How, as you were growing up, how much did you kind of slip into that I guess experiencing that other half of the contradictions, where you write about bar fights and
Yeah.
casual criminals and things like of that nature.
I think for me on a personal level and also as a writer, like how can I put this? I grew up surrounded by what I consider and still consider really good people in bad situations. And
Right.
so religion was like my grandmother was, religion was her linchpin. It was her foundation. It was the thing, that helped her go from day to day. I can remember being a kid in the kitchen, her singing, Southern spirituals as she cooked food. That being said, she was also a woman that didn't take many wooden nickels. I've seen, I've seen her. She's long since left us, but I think she would still be upset if I tell the story. But I've seen her. I've seen her pull a knife on a neighbor who tried to change the property line and take some of her land. And so, and so you live with those dichotomies and those contradictions. I've said this in other events where I was saying that I grew up with people who would go out to the juke joint and have a bar fight Saturday night, but then get up and go to church and sing in the choir Sunday morning. And so you live with those dichotomies and those contradictions. And I think for me, when I was a young man, it used to make me angry because I felt like it was hypocrisy. And now that I'm an older man and facing, maybe not the autumn, but maybe the late summer of my life, I realized that it's just the vagaries of the human nature that we all, not to put too fine a point on it, but we all fall short of grace. And like Jonathan Edwards would say, we're all sinners in the hands of an angry God. And so you're constantly doing your best. Or as my pastor, who is no longer with us either, Reverend Ivory Stokes, used to say, you know, if Moses slips up and falls and David slips up and falls, then none of us should be ashamed that we slip and fall. And so, I also grew up around people who, like I said, good people who did make bad decisions. I grew up around uncles who made moonshine and sold it. I grew up around cousins who liked to who enjoyed fighting. It was like
Yeah.
a pastime. And so, you grew up with that in that environment. But also those uncles, I actually recently lost one
Yeah.
a few weeks ago. Those uncles also taught me what I guess would be considered a stereotypical viewpoint about being a man, but I think it still holds weight, and I think it still is tied to idea of faith. If you're a man, you don't put your hands on a woman. You're nice to old ladies. If you give somebody your word, if you shake hands with a person and tell them you're going to do something, then you do it. And so those contradictions are weaved within the realities of being a poor person in the South. And so again, you go back to church, you go back to the foundation of it. It is something that helps people. I'm not one that ascribes this idea. Oh, if you believe or you have faith, you're a fool. Whatever helps you through the day,
Hmm.
whether you're a Christian and you go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, or whether you're, a hipster and you enjoy, drinking locally sourced coffee, whatever gives you comfort, I'm not going to judge it.
I find it fascinating in your writing how well you capture the contradictions, because it is really what makes characters real, but it is also the toughest thing to capture honestly. Because anybody can write a hypocrite and make them look bad, and anybody can write a religious fanatic. And there's plenty of examples out there, but a lot of times they fall flat on a page because people are just running through the motions. You got a flat character with a flat personality. But you've done a good job of capturing people that are like, I bet he knew somebody like that kind of characters.
Thanks,
Now,
man. Thank you.
you and I both write about the South.
Hmm.
You've spent plenty of time writing horror stories. I'm still doing it, and you've taken some of those skills over to crime fiction as well, of course.
Hmm.
What makes the South such a fertile ground for storytelling, in your opinion?
I think it's the old, and I'm probably gonna get this quote wrong, even despite how much I love it. But I think it's Faulkner's quote that goes, "The past is never dead. It's not even the past." And I think that really, really influences, the literary tradition in the South. You can look at Southern horror writers like or Southern Gothic writers, because to me, Southern Gothic to me is horror writing with a conscience. It's
Right.
horror writing in the back of the pew, in the last pew of the church. And so you look at like you look at someone like Flannery O'Connor, or like even some of Eudora Welty stuff, and a lot of Faulkner stuff is grand Gunal horror, body horror to a certain extent, horror of the situation. It's not so much spectral or supernatural. The worst monsters in those stories are the people, regular, everyday people. You take a story like Revelations from Flannery O'Connor, where this woman considers herself an upstanding Christian, and yet she looks at heaven and sees it segregated. So she finds, epiphany. She finds an epiphany in a pigsty. But I think for me, the thing that really, really sticks in my writing, and I've kind of dabbled a little bit in horror recently, and messing around with some things, some ideas. Is that the incredible, bloody, brutal history of the South leaves a stain on your soul. I think it's like a psychic curse that it goes from generation to generation. Sins of the fathers and mothers visited upon sons and daughters. I think you can see it, and also I think also the atmosphere, the environment of the South. Hot summers, humidity where it feels like the sun is a foot from your face. It creates this sort of speculative, spectral atmosphere. I've often said in reference to crime writing, but it's true about horror writing too. There are very few places that can be as scary as a dirt road in the country late at night with no moon in the sky. And so I think that it lends itself not only sociologically but emotionally to the distillation of psychic and supernatural horrors.
It's fascinating. I've run into recently, because again, like I said, a lot of what I'm writing is set in the South, and especially with short stories, I've written pretty broadly different places. But you'll run into this with Southern readers, where like everything, of course, from every reader is filtered through their experience. So a guy from the hills in Tennessee thinks he knows what the South is, and a guy from Texas thinks he knows what the South is, and a guy from South Georgia thinks he knows what the South is, and the Panhandle, and low country South Carolina, and up the coast into North Carolina, and hills, Appalachia, Kentucky, and so forth. You take all those places, and they could be on different planets some days, and you even microcosm it. Like I live near Conway, South Carolina, which is close to Myrtle Beach. Myrtle Beach with the tourism and everything, and then Conway, South Carolina with its tobacco fields and its old South, and trapped in the middle of the world that's moving on around it and stuff. Like from town to town, you're almost on different planets. And so when we talk about the South, it's rich, but it's a region of very different cultures. And then of course you add in the element of race, and what a white guy and growing up in Conway, South Carolina experiences is very different from what a black guy growing up in Conway, South Carolina is, and then that's you extrapolate that across. I found something you said very, very interesting, and it impacts your work because you have different races interacting in your stories, and of course they're in crime situations, and they're coming from bad places, so they're already making bad choices anyway. But then one thing you said that I found very, very interesting was it had to do with the Confederate flag issue, but it's broader than that. It's a much broader discussion than that. So we can get into either one. But you had said that like when white folks like my family would be talking about the Confederate flag being tradition, and it's the story of the South and all that kind of stuff. You'd made the comment, well, I'm Southern too. So like any idea of what the Southern story is that like my family would tell going back however many generations, preachers in Mississippi, and in the times of segregation and all that. If we're telling the story of the South, it has to include your folks too, your family, who have a very different experience and very different opinions from my grandpa for sure. And that's an idea that makes sense, but it's not one that we think about very much. The South is what I've experienced, and I know other people have done it too, but we microcosm it, and then just the idea that like I can't claim it myself because your experience is the story of the South too. I guess how would you talk about how that sort of impacted you in your regular life, but then also how you've addressed it as a writer as well.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I love that sense that you said it's the microcosmic or microchasmic multitude of identities of the South. I've said this before. No one has a monopoly on the Southern experience, and I think for too long, a certain swath of the Southern population has felt like, well, the South is how I define it. It's summertime and the living is easy. It's Confederate flags and generals and Van Dyke beards and goatees, and it's what I say it is. And my family, we're blessed to be able to trace our lineage back 6 generations. My great great grandmother was born a slave and was able to experience freedom in her lifetime. And so I say this, we have as much claim to this ground, this soil, this region as anyone else because we paid for it in blood.
Yeah.
And so, there's a reason I named an African American character in Black Tie Wasteland Beauregard. I did that this is a Matter of Faith podcast, so I'll clean it up. I did it as a middle finger to a certain part of the society because, I wanted to reclaim what it means to have Southern identity and what it means to have Southern heritage. But that being said, there's a lot more I have in some instances. I have a lot more in common with you or a good friend of ours, Eric Pruitt, or even a dude that's riding around with a Trump flag in his truck than I do with someone from Philadelphia or Chicago, New York. If I go to Philly, I've actually done this. If I'm in New York and I'm using a phrase like, my grandma was cooking them biscuits, man. She put her foot in those last night. I don't have to explain to you what that means. I don't have to explain to Eric Pruitt what that means. I had to explain it to my editor up on West 81st Street in New York City. And so, she's like, what does that mean? I'm so fascinated. And so there's a certain shorthand that we have growing up in the South. There are certain experiences that are saying, like, if I tell you, if we talk about mosquitoes at twilight, or we talk about like I just mentioned earlier, like a hot day where it's so humid you feel like if you make a fish you can squeeze a glass of water out of the air. Or if I talk to you about Southern cooking, whether it's fried chicken or baked potatoes or cornbread or crackling or even the dreaded chitlin, we share those experiences. We share those experiences despite our racial differences, despite our varied backgrounds, religious, sexuality, what have you. Because the South is such a unique region that it's also at the same time full of multitudes. And when I write, I want to include as many of those interpretations as I can, as far as it makes sense within the book. You mentioned My Darkest Prayer. My Darkest Prayer is very much steeped in the tradition of, the last legal segregation in America is the church and the funeral home. And what does that mean? What does that mean to the people of those communities? And how do they interact? And how long will that go on? And so at the same time, I have a very, if you read My Darkest Prayer, you would think I have a very dim view of religion, and I don't. I have a very dim view of organized religion as it's corrupted by man. I always say religion is corruptible, the word is not. And so it's funny because I don't talk about this a lot publicly, not because I'm ashamed. I just feel like I don't want to impose my beliefs on anyone else. But I definitely feel that the South, people make fun of the South. It's the Bible Belt, and there's an implication that if you believe in God, you're a little bit less intelligent. But to make that lighten up things a little bit, you ever been out in the South in the middle of July and you're working in a yard or cutting grass or doing some kind of outside labor, you believe in God. It's just like it's got to be a God somewhere because there's going to be some Kool-Aid in the house. And so, the varied interpretations of the South are one thing, but then there are unified experiences that we can share. And so when I write, I try to include both of those. And it seems like people have understood what I was trying to do.
You and I met the first time at a Noir at the Bar in Durham, and you've been to a bunch of them. I've been to one as an actual performer and a couple others just watching and things. Basically, it's a reading, and it's done at a bar, and it's crime fiction, and then you bring a short story in, a short piece, and share it, and try to get everybody in there's attention for as long as you can, and then let them go. And the night that we did it, I remember I went in, and each person kind of had to recapture the crowd a little bit. Like they'd kind of gone off in their conversation, so you had to talk a little, get a few sentences in, say enough to where you caught their attention again, and everybody quiet back down. Now I remember when you read, the bar went silent, and it stayed silent, and I was impressed by the piece you did. And you and I have talked about this before, but like I was incredibly impressed by it. Like it was one of the best short stories I'd heard in a long time, and I talked about it on videos and other places too.
You did.
Now,
Thank you.
At that point, you didn't have a book out. Is that correct? Like you hadn't published a novel yet. So My Darkest Prayer was your first novel.
It was my first crime novel. I had self-published fantasy. Well, I had published a fantasy novel with some friends. We basically had a group where we would publish each other's books, and we trade editing details, and it was sort of like a punk band motif doing literature. But I hadn't done anything. I hadn't gotten paid for anything yet. And so I had done a bunch of short stories, and it's ironic because that story I read was sort of the inspiration for Black Top Wasteland. But it's funny, I wanted to mention that because you read a fantastic story. It was a hilarious story about a guy at a call center he's at a suicide prevention call center, and he's trying to get people to go through with their plans because he needs a transplant. But I love that story. It's very funny. And I have a very dark sense of humor, so that's why I laugh. But it's funny because two things about that story. One, that was my first noir at the bar. But I grew up in the church, and I grew up doing stuff in the church, so I wasn't afraid to speak in front of people. Public speaking is a part of being, if anybody's been Southern Baptist, Pentecostal, whatever, you're going to speak in church. And you're going to do benediction, or not benediction, you're going to do responsive reading, or you're going to read the morning Old Testament, New Testament, what have you. But anyway, so I'd never done that before, but I'd had some public speaking experience. But the person who put that together didn't tell me the time limit. So that's a long story. That story was like 12 minutes. And I felt really bad. And what's funny? I learned from that. The next time I did one, I wrote a piece specifically, and I've always done it since. If I'm invited to do a noir at the bar, I write a piece specifically for the noir at the bar.
Yeah.
But having said all that, that was a really cool experience because when I finished, nobody said anything. And I was like, I didn't think that's shit. I'm crap.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I remember I passed you, and you were like, "That's a really good story, man." I said, "Thank you." And I was kept on walking, and this lady stopped me, and she grabbed my arm like really tight, and she was crying, and she was like, "That was incredible." And then people started clapping, and it was whatever. But I like doing the water bars. I like the energy. I miss them. I'm doing a bunch on Zoom here lately, but and it's fun because I get to see my friends and all of us. I got a little crew in Virginia, the RVA, Richmond Crime Writers. It's not an official group. We just call ourselves that. But you get to see your friends and stuff. But there's nothing like, for me, reading in front of a live crowd. I enjoy it. I used to be, since this is a faith program, I'll tell you this. I used to be what we used to have junior church, and one Sunday out of the month, all the kids would run the church service. Now, I was the junior minister, so I got to give a little sermon. And it's funny, I understand, and I talk about this in Darkest Prayer, but I understand sometimes why ministers, for lack of a better word, go to the dark side. Because when you give a sermon, and I mean, again, for anybody that's listening who's not a part of a Southern Baptist church, it's a performance art. It is, it's a performance, and so it's live art, and so there's a sense of power when people are hanging on your every word that is very addictive. And I remember as a kid, my brother was pushing me. He said, "Man, you should be a minister. You should be a minister." And he was like, "We can get brand new cars and brand new." And I said, "But I don't." Because he said I was good at public speaking, but I didn't feel the calling. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like I was being called to be a minister. But I understand how that can corrupt you to a certain extent. And so go back to Noir Bar. I enjoy that with Noir Bar. Of course, you're not trying to corrupt anybody. You just want to have a good time. But I enjoy it. It's such a great give and take. And it made me a better writer because, again, after that event and after I dragged on because I think somebody almost didn't get a chance to read, I felt really bad. And so it pushed me to tighten my writing style, especially for short stories. And eventually, one of my short stories that I had written originally for Noir the Bar got published, and it won an award. It won the Anthony for Best Short Story
Yeah, yeah.
in 2019. And I credit Noir the Bar for making me a much better. Even in my longer stuff in my books, uh, I used to have. I think Stephen King calls it verbal elephantitis, and I used to be that way. I used to just have long, florid sentences and long pastoral exchanges, and I really learned to tighten things up.
Yeah, that it was interesting. I've kind of changed my philosophy on readings and stuff like that, like writing specifically. Like I write differently for a spoken to a crowd that I do to the written word, because they're different things that work one way that don't work the other. And I have a certain I almost take almost an antagonistic approach to the crowd, like where
I like
I'm
that.
looking to I'm looking to almost like they're land that needs to be conquered, kind of thing.
Yeah,
No,
well,
it's interesting. Like I would never advise anyone to do a 12-minute story, but yours
no,
worked. And I know you're talking about church, but you almost went the opposite of how you weren't. It was almost like you weren't putting into performance. You almost drew into yourself a little bit, and
yeah,
the words were understated. The story was very high octane, and
hmm
just it was thick with emotion. Because it's father son dealing with like this.
hmm
Things are basically collapsing while they're enjoying this high octane ride. But the
right.
words just kind of were real easy and quiet, and the crowd was drawn in, and that you had them the entire 12 minutes. It wasn't like everybody started getting antsy. Now, no one else listening to this should ever try that. Like that,
Please don't.
yeah, it's a
Please
bad
don't.
idea. But this was that one time in the universe where it worked right, and a lot of it had to do with the story. What motivated you? Because I don't think you were thinking about it at first, and maybe it was that performance, maybe it was the reaction afterwards or something. But what motivated you to kind of jump off from sort of, I guess, the themes, the
hmm
maybe even the story itself, to make that your
Yeah.
first novel? The first
Um,
novel you were going for pay for.
well, what happened was I read that. Okay, so I was when I wrote that story, I was in the midst of writing my detective novel, My Darkest Prayer, and to be perfectly honest, that story is. It talks about some heavy issues. It talks about religion and sex and sexuality in small towns, and secrets and lies and so on and so
Right,
forth.
right.
But it's way more I don't want to say pastiche, but an homage to the types of detective stories I grew up reading. So it's very pulpy. It's very Walter Mosley, Raymond Chandler esque, except it takes place in modern times.
Yeah, yeah.
When I read that story, which is called Slant Six, about a week after that event, or maybe 2 weeks, I got an email that it had got a distinguished mention in Best American Mystery Short Story because it had been previously published. And I already really liked the story a lot. Um, but that made me kind of curious as to, well, maybe I could do something. Maybe I could stretch this out because I liked the character. I thought he had potential to be interesting. He's a little bit different in the book than he is in the short story,
Yeah, yeah.
but and also for me personally, it was cathartic. Like I said, I mentioned before, but for a long time, my dad and I didn't have a great relationship, and thankfully, he's older, but we've repaired our relationship, and through repairing it, I learned. You talk about again. I mean, you talk about faith. So I'll tell you a really funny story real quick, and then I'll get back
Yeah.
to the book. So my dad got really sick. I moved out of Virginia for a while, and I was actually dating someone differently, a whole different life, and I was living in Fayetteville. North Carolina, and my dad he used to drink a lot. He was, wasn't a violent alcoholic. If anything, he was a lovey-dovey alcoholic. But
Yeah, yeah,
anywho, he was good. Like I said, he when he was drinking, he never met a stranger. And so
yeah,
anyway, he got really sick, and my mom called me. She's like, "Hey, your dad's not doing well. He's in the hospital, and they don't know if he's gonna make it." And I was like, I was still very angry with him at the time because your parents separate, and I hadn't dealt with that anger. I had a lot of misplaced rage, and so the girl I was dating at the time, she said, you should go see him. You won't forgive yourself if something happens, and you don't get a chance to say goodbye. And so I go up to Virginia, and I say, hey, I go to the hospital, and he's hooked up all these tubes and stuff and everything. And, I tell him, look, I can't forget what happened and how things went, but I forgive you. Don't hold that in your heart that I'm angry with you. I'm not. We need to let things go. And, it's funny. About a month later, he got better. And I was like, I did not expect that, because I kind of would have been thinking, well, he's not going to make it through this, so we can kind of bury the hatchet. And then we got it. Now he's better. Now we got to work with all these feelings and emotions that we talked about.
Yeah,
But it was good. It was good because I learned, through talking to him, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned about life. And that life isn't black and white, and that nobody's, except maybe for the exception of a couple people, nobody's a complete villain. And nobody's a complete hero. But anyway, so writing the book was very cathartic for me, because it talks about fathers and sons and relationships, and the inability of sons and fathers to communicate sometimes. And it talks about the history of violence, and whether it's a nurture versus nature argument. Can you be better than your past? Are you predisposed to be a certain type of way, or can you change, or are we who we are meant to be? And so that story, it was almost to the point I was scared to start another book. I just finished another book because I didn't know if I could ever reach the same heights as I did with Blacktop Wasteland. And it was kind of, and me being me, I just said, to hell with it, I'm going to start it and see what happens. And I finished this other book. I just finished a book called Razor Blade Tears. And that's not so much about race and, well, it's a little bit, everything I write has race in it, but it's much more about, it's about these two fathers, one black, one white, who are both ex-cons, whose gay sons are murdered, and they were in a relationship together. And so they decide to investigate. It brings them together, investigate the murder, and get vengeance for their boys. But at the same time, it's a lot about them redeeming themselves, because when their kids were growing up, these two fathers were very homophobic,
right?
And so they didn't respect their son's sexuality. And so now, in an effort to get revenge, they're also trying to redeem themselves. And I wasn't sure that it was going to be, I sound pretentious saying this. I think Blacktop Wasteland is as good as I could have wrote it. I think it's as good a book as I could make it. And I was wondering, would this book be the same? Would people respond to it? And so far, I've got a lot of beta readers and editors and everybody seem to like it. And so, but Blacktop Wasteland took a millstone from around my neck in many ways. It was just because I talk about a lot of stuff that I was holding inside, and so it was allowed me to free myself of some emotional baggage.
That's amazing. Like, just on the pitch, you've sold me on that book. I think you may have done it again. Now, I remember when my Darkest Prayer came out. Again, it's the first novel, so you're always taking a chance reading a first novel, especially somebody you know, if they ever ask you how the book is, and if you have to dance around it or something. But I read that book, and I was floored, and I had some pretty high expectations, because I was coming off that Slant Six story that I was so high on, and then was like, I was expecting you to do it again, and you did. And I recommended that book all over the place. I think I may have recommended that book more than your publisher did. So,
and thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. And it was one of those things where, like, when I'm doing recommendations, and I do it a lot on Twitter and other places like that, I kind of look at what the person is, what they say, what they've talked about, and try to match a book with them. And there were a lot of places where, like, if I couldn't figure out what they were into, I'd just recommend My Darkest Prayer, because I'm like, this is a good book. Everybody's got to like this book, And I think it caught on with a lot of folks, because they'd come back and ask me for other recommendations. I got to read an advanced copy of Blacktop Wasteland, because I was bothering you about it a good bit. And again, floored with it. It's not the same book. It has a lot of the same themes, but it's not the same book as My Darkest Prayer. But it was really good too, and I'm recommending this book. And then and we do that for a lot of friends that are writers and stuff. We read their book, we like it, we did, and most of us don't get anywhere. We're not knocking down doors or anything. But then, like, other people started picking up on Blacktop Wasteland, and as good as I knew it was, I was kind of surprised. And like, the biggest surprise for me, and I imagine it was big for you too, was the day that Stephen King tweeted that was on his reading pile. And,
oh my gosh!
So he did it once, which you're like, oh wow, that's big. Yeah. And then I'm watching this interview with Stephen King, and he talks about it again. And I'm like, how much publicity does this guy need? Let's spread that around a little bit. But then the hosts of it were like, oh yeah, we read that book too. We really like it. We got some to give away. So about 5 minutes
Yeah.
of the program got to be about Blacktop Wasteland.
Oh
And I
man.
imagine there's some people in your life that are kind of jealous about that. And we can talk about it later. But I'm definitely jealous. But I'm really excited for you because I'm like, well, I must be right. If Stephen King likes the book this much, obviously I'm onto something. What was that like for you?
Oh my
Because
gosh, man.
it's essentially it's your second novel, even though you
Yeah,
published some
yeah.
stuff before, and you're still kind of trying to work your way up, and then suddenly Stephen King can't stop talking about your book. I can't imagine what that does to
Man,
your head and how you try to get around it and everything.
okay, so first of all, I'm like millions and millions of other people. Stephen King is one of my favorite writers, one of my writing heroes. He's on the Mount Rushmore with Walter Moses, Dennis Lehane, Raymond Chandler, and other writers that I really, really, really adore. And for me personally, and I know you picked this up. You feel I don't know if you might feel similar. Because when you read a Stephen King book, a lot of times, he's Stephen King, so he has the power to do this. He does a foreword or afterword or something. And especially when I was younger, when I was like 12 or 13, reading Salem's Lot or Carrie, or the big three, the first three, Salem's Lot, Carrie, and Shining, you kind of feel like he's talking to you
Yeah,
personally. You know, he calls you, he calls it the constant reader or whatever. But those afterwords and forewords are very folksy. They're very comfortable, and so I was, I felt a very strong kinship with Stephen King at an early age, and then you go and you read it and you read, and of course, like a lot of people, as I got older, my taste changed a little bit, but, every time a Stephen King book came out, it was always, yeah, I got to go by the bookstore and get that. I got to check it out. Some of them I like more than others, some of them I didn't care for, but I'm never bored with his books, and he will always have a special place for me because I read him so young. I started reading Stephen King books when I was like 11, 12.
hmm
My aunt would read them and then she would give them to me. And they were the first books that I really consider grown up books that I read. These
yeah,
weren't, Three Investigators or Super Fudge. These were real books. And these were talking about not just scary monsters and vampires and telekinetic kids and ghosts, but real life stuff. Jack Torrance. And I grew up, again, I don't think my father would dispute that he had a problem with alcohol. But again, he wasn't violent, but but he was a very friendly man outside of his marriage. I'll put it like that. And
right,
so,
right, yeah,
as a kid, when you read about Jack Torrance, I didn't have that experience that Danny has, but I was around somebody who changed when they drank alcohol.
hmm
Or if you read Salem's Lot, I didn't live in a small town in New England, but I knew that town.
yeah,
Our town had the town. Our town had the supposed fast woman, which you find out when you grow up. A lot of women aren't fast; they just not listening. They're not letting men tell them what to do.
right,
But whatever. So I've always had this almost, in my mind, a personal relationship with Stephen King,
yeah,
and so to see him talk about my book in a video link and then tweet about it later and really, really, complimentary. It was almost like being in the Twilight Zone. It was very surreal.
yeah,
It was like it felt like an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents or some weird speculative supernatural story because I just never thought it would happen ever. And the funny thing is, I was writing when that went down. Somebody texted me and was like, "Hey, are you watching this bookstore's live stream?" And I was like, "No, I'm writing. I'm trying to finish these revisions." And trying to find new ways to kill people with shovels, and so and so like my friend was like, "You got to go on there, man. I think they're talking about you." So I went on and it was on the YouTube thing, so I could actually back it up a little bit because I'd actually missed it. And when he said it, man, I was floored. I literally like went out in the living room and laid down on the couch. I was like, I can't believe this. It's got to be the equivalent of a kid who plays, guitar, hearing from, getting a attaboy from Jimi Hendrix or something. I mean,
yeah.
it blew my mind. It was incredible.
It's interesting because I've read Stephen King before and I'm in the process of rereading all his books. Writing blogs about him and things like that. So I'm running into those forwards and afterwards, and he'll start mentioning writers who I've now met. Like
Oh,
John
wow.
Skip and stuff. So these guys are
Yeah.
heroes to me, but I actually know them and they know who I am, and I'm
Right,
not
right.
on their level, but like I'm in that circle, and so like he'll start talking about somebody I know, and that'll be interesting. But even this, like when the tweets went out, I was like, oh my god, like it feels like the veil is being pulled off the world, and we're a lot closer than you think.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
while we're on the subject of the rise of Blacktop Wasteland, we set up this interview not but a couple days ago, and now we're having the
Yeah.
interview now. Now between those two times, an announcement comes out that you got a movie deal. So
Oh
tell me
man.
how that came about.
Oh my gosh. So okay. So Blacktop Wasteland is it gets picked up. Okay. So I don't think I've ever told you the story, and I'm gonna try to. I'm long with it, so I'm gonna try to
No, take
shorten
it.
it.
No,
I'll
tell
tell
me the
you.
story, man. I want to hear the
Okay.
whole thing.
So the way Blacktop Wasteland actually started, this because I have a really good agent, and the way I met him, his name is Josh Gessler, and the way I met him in 2018, Eric Pruitt, my buddy, your friend of mine, and a great writer and filmmaker and artist in his own right. Um, he was at an event called BoucherCon. It's this big mystery crime fiction. It's a world event. You see people from all over the world there, and they move it around, or they did in the before times. And this was in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so, My Darkest Prayer was coming out in January of 2019, and so this is in like October of 2018. And so, I was working with a small company called Intrigue Publishing, really great people, but it's independent press. They don't have the money to send me to Florida. So I saved my money for like 6 months and went to Florida. And so while I'm down there, Eric gets me on this panel about Southern crime fiction. He said, I think you'd be a great addition. And I was kind of self deprecatingly saying, hey, I don't even have a book out yet, man. He said, no, but you're a great writer. You need to be on this panel. So it's me and a guy named Ace Atkins, who's famous for writing his
Oh
own
yeah.
series book, but he also for the Robert Parker stuff. Steph Post, who was a writer on the come up. She's an incredible writer. I hope more people see her work. And Alice, a girl who just wrote a Star Wars tie-in, but he's
Yeah, yeah,
also a
yeah.
crime fiction writer. And Eric Pruitt, who's been award-nominated author and filmmaker, and me, who wrote some short stories. And so we're on this panel, but it was one of the best panels. And now I've done a bunch of these things, and in person and on Zoom. But it was one of the best. It literally was the best panel I've ever been on. It was so much fun, and we all talked about our Southern bona fides. And Steph Post, I'm Southern because I got chased by a pig, and I was like, I'm Southern because I got caught drinking moonshine. So my granddaddy made me drink the whole jar, and I got sick. And so, anyway, at the end of it, and you've experienced this, I'm sure. We had somebody stand up, and we were talking about everything in Southern fiction: crime, race, poverty, religion. We had a lady stand up, and she said, "I don't have a question, I have a comment." And I know now it's like, buckle up, here we
Oh,
go. And so she says, basically, I know that the antebellum period of time in the South was bad for some people, but I miss those times, and I feel like we as white Americans are being pushed aside, and so on and
oh
so
my
forth. And
God.
you'd hear a pin drop in that room. And so Eric, who's got a little bit of a devil in him, he turns to me, he's like, "You want to take that question, Sean?" I was like, "I would love to take it." And so I was very sardonic with the lady. I said, "Look, I know it's difficult. You feel like you're being pushed aside, but my people have been degraded and distressed for 400 years. So I'm going to help you. I'm going to teach you how to be a minority. We're going to learn what to do when cops pull you over for nothing." I said, "You're going to learn how to talk to a security guard who follows you around the store, assuming you don't have enough money." I said, "Me and you, we're going to get through this together." And she got very upset and left. Everybody laughed, and it kind of went out of the room. And afterwards, Josh Gessler comes up to me. He taps him on the shoulder. He's like, "Hey, man, I like what you're talking about. Do you have anything you're working on?" And what I was working on was Blacktop Wasteland. So fast forward, it gets sold, and he sold it like, in I think it was 4 months. And so when we sold it to Flatiron Books, which a subsidiary of Macmillan, Josh was like, "Hey, would you mind if I made some inquiries about whether or not somebody would want to option this for a movie?" He said, "Because it's very cinematic, and I write cinematically
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
mind." Yeah, and so he was like, "It's very cinematic. I think it'd make a great movie." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever, man." I was like, I just didn't think anything would come of it." And so, like, within a year, I was like, it was 6 months later, I get a call from Josh. He's like, "Hey, so there's a company called Picture Start, and they're very interested in the book. Would you have time to talk to them on a conference call?" I'm like, "Yeah, all right, sure." Still not, I'm Southern, so I don't think nothing's gonna happen. And so I get on there, and they're talking about, "Hey, we want to make this movie. We want a 5-year option on this film." And again, I still just didn't believe it because it's like, all right, 5-year
Yeah.
option, it'll probably never get made, whatever. I know a lot of writers who's been optioned, and I don't mean to
Right,
be
right.
I mean, be pessimistic, but you can't get your hopes up about that.
Right.
So
There's more options than movies.
exactly. So then, this is all 2019. So
Yeah.
nothing happens. Nothing happens. Then, like right before the pandemic hit, Josh was like, "Hey, they made us an offer. I think we should take it." I'm like, "All right." So they optioned it, and that process takes a while to get everything straight. And not again, I'm Southern and rural Baptist by the grace of God. I don't talk about money, but I did receive a check about 2 months ago for the first year of the option. And it wasn't huge, it was nice. It's not like, we're not talking, as Stephen King money, but it was
Right.
nice. I was like, okay, that's cool. I can actually like buy some groceries this week. And so I'm still not thinking anything about it. I'm still thinking, okay, it's option, whatever. The guy, the screenwriter who's been announced for the movie, he contacted me about a week ago, and he said, "Hey, I don't know, we don't know each other." He contacted me on Twitter. He DM'd me. He said, "We don't know each other, but I think we're going to be working together." And I'm like, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, just give me a heads up." I'm like, "All right." Still didn't think nothing. Then yesterday, I've eaten a sub from Subway, and my phone starts jumping off the. I mean, it's literally vibrating off my desk, and my desk is a card table, so and it's literally vibrating off my desk, and I'm like, "What is going on?" And I'm getting all these text messages from people, and I'm getting tagged in all these Twitter responses. I'm like, "What the hell is going on?" So I go on Twitter, and then I see there's an article from Variety that the gentleman who wrote or co-wrote the movie Mudbound, a great Southern drama that's set in the 30s, has been tasked to adapt Black Child Wasteland for the screen, and it's going to be a conjunction production between Picture Start, the folks who bought the option, and the musician John Legend and his film production company, Get Lifted Productions, and he's starting to write the screenplay. We got a Zoom call. We're going to try to arrange a Zoom call pretty soon to talk about some things, and he's getting right to work on it. And it just, I went to sleep last night. I had a headache last night because it was just so crazy.
Yeah.
It's just so insane. And so many people were so nice and have been so complimentary. And, it's just, I spoke about it earlier. I recently lost one of my uncles. We were very close. And one of my favorite childhood memories is sitting in the house on a summer evening. We didn't have air conditioning. We had a big green metal death fan.
Yeah.
It's like 3 minutes of murder. And there's this huge fan. It sounds like a motorcycle engine. And that be in the window. And we used to sit on my grandma had this big green suede couch, huge couch. We would sit on the couch. It'd be me, my uncle, and my grandfather. And we'd watch the CBS Saturday Night movie. And they always had like a rural redneck crime movie like Gator or White Lightning or Fox Called Bertha or something like that, or Big Bad Mama. And my uncle and my granddad loved those movies, so consequently I grew to love those movies. And it's kind of poignant that and those movies inspired a lot of my writing, and so it's kind of poignant that I was telling a friend of mine, I said, "Man, I wish." Because my uncle loved Burt Reynolds and he loved Ned Beatty, and he was just a huge fan of that genre, that style of film.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Man, I wish." And his nickname was Sonny Boy. And I said, "Man, I wish Sonny Boy was still here to see this." And a friend of mine said, "He sees it. He sees it." That gives you solace a little bit. But yeah, it's ironic that came out. But as far as how it feels, I still don't believe it. I still can't believe it. As you was talking about the South, I'm a poor boy from the lowlands of Virginia. 50 miles from the nearest big city. I grew up, climbing magnolia trees and catching crawdaddies, and getting some older folks to buy me some MD 2020 so I could go to a field party. And I'm a college dropout, and I just, you talk about, the podcast is called Matters of Faith, and like I said again, whatever you call it, someone is looking out for me. Something's looking out for me. Because I couldn't do this by myself. I couldn't.
Blacktop Wasteland is a great book, and like you said, you do kind of write like you're seeing a movie in your head, I think. But one thing I was impressed with is you always had kind of a left turn in a scene. So there's always a moment. I don't even want to call it a twist because that's a little cliche. It's almost like, oh, he was the bad guy the whole time, something like that. And it's not that. It's that like you've seen stories or scenes like it before. So you think, okay, I have an idea where this is going. And every time I made the mistake of thinking I got an idea where this is going, there's a sharp left turn. And it's not like out of nowhere where it's like, oh, he just made something up. It's like, oh, he set that up the whole time. I can see it now. And so you got this opening scene that's really intense, and you get it and you're like, oh, okay, I see what this is about. And there's little clues that that's not what it's about. And then the character figures out, the tables turn, that kind of thing. So then we get into the I guess like you said, you move the novel fast, so there's no stretch that's real long. But we get into the stretch of the novel where we're kind of seeing where the guy is and why all these events are piling up on him that's going to push him back into the life that he stepped out of. And so then he's going to the guy who he's worked for in the past. You think, okay, this is how he's going to end up back in this mess. So you kind of, all right, I see where this is going. He's going to get back connected with this guy. It's going to be the next thing. And then it's like, oh, that took another left turn. It's that door's, that should, in any novel, that should be the way he got back in. But no, we took a left turn. That door's closed. So it actually turns out that, oh, it would have been better for him if that guy had if he had ended up,
somebody's got to.
He needed a better criminal. That's what the problem was. He got a bad criminal instead of a good criminal. So like he takes his left turn, which takes him down another darker path, and you're like, oh wow. And then it just keeps going and going and going. So like I imagine that stuff didn't happen by accident. You knew what you were doing. You knew you were leading me in one way, and that you knew you had me, and then you knew you took where that left turn was coming in. What's it like orchestrating that in a book? Like, are you outlining those turns to where you know where you're going to make them, or are you kind of figuring them out as you go? Is it a combination? Like, how do you make that work so that you end up with a blacktop wasteland instead of just some story that I can predict how it's going to go?
It's a combination. For me, I mean, some people are pantsists and some people are plotters. I'm kind of a hybrid. What I do with every long story I write. I don't do it with short stories. But I do with long stories, novellas and novels. I write myself a very long synopsis. Basically, that's me telling myself the story. And it's not dialogue. It's just, for Black Hot Wasteland, there's a guy named Beauregard, and he does this, and he wants to do that, and how does he do it? And I'm telling myself that story. Because to me, writing a story is like, I don't say breaking in the house. It's like trying to enter a house. I can't visualize the story until I can get in the house. And for me to get in the house, whether it's climb through a window or picking the front door lock or going in the back door that's open, I have to see how the story is going to end. Now, 99% of the time, that's not how the story ends. But for me to start it, I have to see the middle, the beginning. I have to do the 3-act structure. That's what works for me. As far as you were talking about those specific instances, that was calculated in a way because I love that type of book. I love that type of movie, the heist novel, the One Last Job, so on and so forth. But I wanted to create a situation for the character, for Beauregard, where I wanted it. It's almost like he was in this vice, and I just wanted to keep tightening it and tightening it and tightening it. And so, like you said, he goes to his old, the old dude that's like the fence/connect. And like I said, most movies, well, that's the guy that's going to look out for him and hook him up, and then other things are going to happen to lead him down a very path. I wanted to do something different because the thing about Black Hot Wasteland is it's a crime novel, it's a heist novel, but it's also, for me as a writer, it was a character study. And, I like Beauregard, but I think he's emotionally stunted. I think that he's emotionally frozen. And so what I wanted was everybody around him is like this Greek chorus trying to stop him from making this decision.
Yeah.
So you got Booney, his godfather, his dad's best friend. His dad's missing, so he's kind of a de facto father figure. He's lived a life, but he made a decision to get out and become a semi-reputable businessman. You got his wife, who loves him deeply. And, a friend of mine who read the book, a great writer named Kelly Garrett, she read a early draft, and she says, as a reader and a writer, I love this book, but as a woman, it ticks me off. I was like, why? She said, because he had just listened to his wife and sold the damn car. None of this would happen. I'm like, I said, yeah, listen to your wife. That's a good plot point. But I wanted to keep turning the screws, and by turning the screws, I kept taking the story in directions that were different from the movies and books that I'd absorbed. And so, there's a scene, and I don't want to give it away, but since you've read the book, I think we can discuss it around the edges.
Yes.
There's a scene in the book where a character who has sort of been hasn't shown a lot of grit, some grit, and has kind of been pushed around by Beauregard, decides to steal the proceeds from the second heist, right?
Yeah.
And that character, I like doing that because you don't have to be a badass to be bold all the time. You don't have to be a tough person to be bold. Sometimes life is about seeing an opportunity and taking it. Now, that with the way they took it was real crappy, and I don't like them as you wouldn't like them as a person, but I thought that was more realistic, and also it's a little bit of Beauregard's hubris. He doesn't respect that person, and so he made a mistake. He's warned early on, do not, take your eye off this person. They just, they're so crooked. By the time they die, they're going to screw him around. And he does. His hubris endangers him and endangers the people around him. And so things like that, I just wanted to keep doing things like that because I thought that made it more interesting. I mean, I'm not the first person to do that. Donald Westlake does that a lot with the Parker books. But because Parker is such almost a Terminator, you're never really afraid for him. You know he's gonna make it because he's so damn tough. He's like I said, he's just this automaton, and so I wanted to do that, but I wanted to give the reader more a sense of danger, a sense of fear. A sense that maybe this person may not make it out of this situation. And so, every time I felt I got to a point where, I watched a movie like Heat. They did this. I want to do something the opposite or different.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a thing that I wanted to do with that particular book. And I think I try to do it in my future writing. I try to do it in a way that is not cheap, because I love mysteries too. And one thing about mysteries that I love is I hate a mystery that cheats the reader. Yeah. I used to love the old Ellery Queen novels because halfway through the book there's a reader's challenge, and they tell you have all the clues to solve the mystery. And when I'm like 13, reading, I don't know the hell going on. But when you finish the book, you realize, oh yeah, I did have all the clues. And so I don't ever want to do things just out of left field for doing them. I try to sprinkle seeds in the text so people can see it. But I am interested in doing different things and pushing myself as a writer.
It's fascinating. You mentioned the Greek chorus aspect of that first part of the book, where he's getting all his warnings, because he ends up in it. You root for the heist all along, because he's the character we're following, but you always know, like, well, this can't go well. Like, that's kind of the theme of every scene is, well, this can't go well, and you're almost surprised when it doesn't blow up every single time. Like, oh well, that didn't end in a shootout, so I guess it's a victory. That kind of thing. You're kind of at that point, and so you're kind of sunk down with him. But it's fascinating because, like, you realize that, like, the father. I don't want to give anything away, but the father holds a certain spot in the guy's life, the Beauregard's life, and there's a point where a character tells him straight up what that is. Like, I think it's his mother straight up tells him the again, like, we're dancing around the edges, the position that his father holds in his life and the danger of that position his father holds in his life. His mother straight up tells him what it is, and of course he just blunders forward into it. And Beauregard's an interesting character because, of course, like, he's the best friend and the worst friend. He's the best husband and the worst husband. He's the best father and the worst father. And that list goes on and on and on. He's the best driver. He's the worst criminal. All these things that, like, he can, any scene he walks into could just as easily be this magnificent piece of art where he maneuvers his way through it with all the skills that he has, or it could be a total disaster. And either way that scene goes fits his character, because he's had those moments all the way through the book. And like that's what I was referring to earlier when I talked about you being able to just capture contradictions in a way that that works like that. How difficult is it to avoid writing a flat character? Because you got him, you got the other guys that work at the garage, you got the old uncle, you have the daughter. You know, there's the daughter's boyfriend. You have all these characters that could, because they're peripheral, they could very easily be flat. And so, how did you go about like avoiding that trap of throwing in a flat character just to work a scene?
In the first draft, and I got better at this because there are flat characters in Darkest Prayer. There are a couple that I look back on like I should have fleshed him out better. But what I learned, anybody listening that's an aspiring writer, it doesn't hurt to read books about writing. It doesn't hurt to take a class about writing. And I read a book called Story by Robert McKee. It's for screenwriting, but it's great for novel writing too. And he had this line in there about scenes should start one way and end differently. Should never end a scene flat. A scene should either start positively and end negatively, or start negatively and positively. And I took that and I extrapolated it from my purposes to characters. If you're a characters in a scene, they should start either at the bottom of the valley or at the top of the mountain. And then by the end of the scene, they're in a totally opposite place than where they started. And for me, that creates energy, that creates activity, not just physical, but emotional. And so, like, for instance, we'll take a scene. After there's a character named Ronnie Sessions who comes to Beauregard. They've worked together in the past and didn't go well, but Beauregard's in a tight spot, so he listens to his proposal, wants to rob this jewelry store. The next morning after that scene, Ronnie's in a low spot because Bug hasn't agreed to do the job, to be the wheelman, and he's going over in his head, I can't do it. My poor brother Reggie can't do it. You know, none of the people we hang out with have enough. You know, Ronnie's not super smart, but he's smart enough to know that he's dumb. And so he's like, I can't do this. And he's sitting there kind of bummed out, and he's trying to think about how he's going to do this. And then his brother reminds him, hey, you got that, he told you to buy a burner phone and y'all could talk about it. You should call him. And then Ronnie's like, yeah, I'll call him. And when he calls him, of course, he doesn't know Bug has had some stuff happen where he's like, yeah, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to make this work. And by the end of that scene, Ronnie's, now he's, 10 feet tall and bulletproof. He's called his on to get off again girlfriend. He's talking trash to her on the phone. He's trying to arrange a date later on. He's happy because this guy is going to help him out. And that's the scene. Like, again, it exemplifies what I'm talking about. Started out negative, end positive. So by the end of the scene, you've gone on an emotional journey with this character, and that really helped me going forward with stories. The book I worked on, I was telling about Razorblade Tears, the book that I'm outlining now. And so I keep trying to do that. And it's something now that's become just a part of my, for lack of a better word, style. I don't have to think about it. I just do it. If a scene starts positively, ends negatively, or vice versa. Also, for me, and I get a lot of pushback on this from editors, but I like it, so I keep doing it. I like to give characters quirks, not quirks that are just physical quirks or tics, but things about them that are unique. And I think maybe that's a residual effect of my love of the Southern Gothic. Like with Ronnie Sessions, he has 23 Elvis tattoos on his arm. I like describing the physicality of people, whether they're big, overweight, underweight, skinny, tall. I like talking about hands and faces and how people look. And that feeling where you're in the middle of a conversation and somebody says something, you're talking over each other, and when you hear something you don't like and stuff like that. And so those things too help create characters that I hope are alive. I mean, nobody's, we're all struggling in the dark here, but I try to do that. And that's sort of, but yeah, Robert McKee's story is a great resource for any aspiring writer.
Now you mentioned the editors push back on that a little bit. What's their beef with what you're doing there?
Like the editor I work with at Flatiron, who's really great and really smart. And I think she's right to a certain extent. I don't have to describe somebody's hands 5 times. I like to, but you want to pare away anything from the story that's not essential. And then once you get down to the essential aspects of the story, then you've got the best book you can get. And so sometimes, a little bit of flowery, florid language, or a little bit of, pastoral, purple prose is cool. It's good, But then other times, it's a little bit too much. We don't have to take 2 pages describing somebody opening a pack of cigarettes. And not that I do that a lot, but I have that tendency sometimes. I can get very, I can focus on the micro instead of the macro sometimes. Um, but one of my things that I like to do, I love metaphors. I love metaphors. I'm addicted to metaphors. So I have learned to kind of cut back on those a little bit. And so a good editor doesn't stifle your creativity. They hone it and focus it. And that's what she does for me. I appreciate it because the book is much better now, than it was in the rough draft, than it was in the arcs. I mean, a good editor really, again, they don't hold you back. They push you forward. They push you to be the best you can. And so sometimes, and then there are also times where you pick a line in the sand and like, no, I'm not giving up on that. And so more often than not, I've been right. Maybe 20% of the time, she's been right about 90.
Yeah, there you go. All right, I think that's a good balance there.
Mhm.
You and I were talking. Maybe this will be like the last little section we're doing here, but you and I were talking before we started airing, and you're actually recording
Mhm.
this inside like a mortuary funeral home. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you want
My
to talk
day
about that a
job.
little bit while we're on the air?
Yeah. Yeah. So my day job is working at a family mortuary, and it's interesting. You talk about faith, and I have to be perfectly honest. It's funny that I ended up here because I used to have a phobia of death as a kid. I used to have panic attacks as a kid. I saw people, and not violent death. I saw people. I grew up in a house with had a lot of older people. When we moved
Yeah.
in, my grandma, my grandpa, my grandpa was there. My grandmother's brother was there. My grandpa's sister was there for a while. My great grandmother was there for a while. So it was a lot of people in a little house. And so, I saw my great grandmother. I came home from school and she had passed, and I was the first person to get home because everybody else was at work. I was like 12. My great uncle, my grandmother's brother, unfortunately had a massive heart attack at the dinner table, and so and my next door neighbor, I went over to check on him. My mom asked me to go check on him because she didn't see any smoke coming from his chimney during a cold winter's night, and he had passed. And so, as a kid, I had a phobia. I used to have panic attacks. And a friend of mine, was telling me, you gotta go, you gotta just believe in God and you believe in heaven and everything. And it was just hard. I think because I was a kid that was very inquisitive, and I'm the kid that's renting Grey's Anatomy from the library just to see it. I just want to look at it. And
Hmm.
then like, oh, that's all inside of me. What the hell? And so I used to have a really bad phobia about that. And so that my life journey brought me here is kind of ironic. You could say, a greater spirit brought me here to deal with those things and kind of, and I'm still someone who is, it's funny, I'm bold and fearless when it comes to doing activities that could kill me. But then I don't like to think about the consequences, and that's something I had to be honest with. Like I used to have a motorcycle. I'm the first person to like, oh, let's go to the beach and jump off this rocky ledge. Let's test drive this Dodge Challenger and see if we can get it to 180. And so it's kind of these contradictory visions in my life. But the one thing I've learned working here, and I'm not here as much as I used to be because the writing is kind of taking up a lot of my time. But I've learned that there's great comfort in faith. There's great comfort in community, and we walk by faith, not by sight. And you know, when you see somebody, a family here, to me, the the biggest thing that I take away from is when you find I have a family where the member that's passed was obviously loved, because not always that way. It's
Yeah.
not always that way. I've seen situations where it's very cold and very reticent, and
Hmm.
people are like, it's a business transaction. But when you see somebody who is really loved, and the greatest sound to me is laughter inside of a funeral home. That's one of the most beautiful sounds because it tells you that those people are remembering that person, and that person was loved and they were cared for. And no one knows what goes beyond this veil of wrath and tears. But I've got to hope and I've got to believe that those people, those good people, are there and they're waiting for us and watching over us. And I thought that before I had a recent passing in my family, and I hope that's the way it is. I don't know, but I hope it is. And so Also, on a lighter note, working at a funeral home is great for a crime writer. I've seen some wild stuff, man, and it's like, oh, so that's what happens when that happens to you. Okay, all right, I'll write that down. And so it's a great, but it really is the folks that work here that I work with. It's a calling as much as a business, and you have to have a special type of personality to do it. I will tell you another thing that's a little lighter. One thing I learned in the days before pandemic, the folks who work here, they're a part of professional organizations, so they have conventions like writers have conventions. Man, I'm gonna tell you, if you're a partying type of person, you have not partied until you party with morticians, because those guys and gals know how to have a good time, because they're around death and the end of life all the time. When they get a chance to cut loose and they don't have to be staid and quiet, man, shoo, it's something else, boy. And so I was shocked. That's something that shocked me. I was like, wow, you guys want to throw down. All right. This is a high shelf liquor here. But anyway, I think to wrap it all up, we started talking about faith and I'll end it on this. I often say that, people ask questions about faith and God and, if there's a God, why is there so much suffering? And if he's all powerful, why doesn't he stop it, or she, or however you look at it? And, when you go through something, whether it's physical, medical, emotional, whether it's the end of a marriage or the loss of a loved one or a health issue, I think those questions sort of lose their meaning in the broader sense because they're specific to you. And I think that if, again, like I said before, if your religion, if your faith brings you comfort, then, what more is there? That's all we want as people, as human beings, is to be loved and to be comforted. And I think however you get there, to me, it's the opposite of the old phrase. It's not the journey, it's the destination. And however you get there is all that matters.
If people want to connect with you online or pick up your work, where should they be looking?
You can holler at me on Twitter. I'm on there a lot, especially if you get on about 1 a.m. in the morning. I'm usually having a stream of consciousness where it's a bunch of tweets back to back that are kind of nonsensical. But yeah, you can hit me up at Black Lion King 73. That's my Twitter handle. I have a Facebook page, which is S.A. Cosby Author on Facebook. I, as of yet, do not have a website. I need to get on there. But I always love hearing from people. I've heard from a lot of folks with Blacktop Wasteland being out. I've had really cool and really heartwarming emails and messages. I send me emails. I love talking to people, and as evidenced by this podcast, I love talking about the art of writing.
When do you think Razor Blades will be published?
Razor Blades they're aiming for July of 2021. And then that'll be out. And then the paperback version of Blacktop should be out sometime in the first of next year. And while I got a minute, I'll tell you what I'm working on now, because this is more up your alley.
Oh, okay.
I'm in the midst of writing a Southern Gothic murder mystery about the first black sheriff of a small southern town. And on the 1-year anniversary of his election, there's a shooting at the local school, but it's not a mass shooting. A very beloved teacher is killed, a male teacher. And what they find out is the shooter, the male teacher, and a third mystery individual were involved in a serial killing trio. And they were killing young African-American boys from across the country. None of them are local. And they find their bodies, their remains buried under a weeping willow tree in the woods. And so the sheriff has to solve this mystery of who this third person is and try to bring this serial killer to justice, while at the same time dealing with a neo-Confederate march in his small town and small town politics and his own haunted past. And so I'm working on that now. And I want it to be almost supernatural, but not. Like, I wanted to go very basically what I tell people is I wanted to be True Detective, but in Virginia. I wanted to have that same vibe, that same creepiness, that same kind of existential dread. And this is probably going to be my most challenging book, because I'm not just telling the story of this one case, but it's sort of the story of it. Again, it has a lot in common with Salem's Lot. I want to tell stories about this town to create this atmosphere. And the working title of that is Black as Sackcloth. That's from the Book of Revelations. Yes. The moon became black as sackcloth. So it's going to talk about religious mania and religious fanaticism, racism, sexuality, all of that wrapped up in this small little town in southeastern Virginia that unfortunately was apparently the burial ground for a serial killer. So I'm in the middle of working on that, on synopsizing and doing research and stuff. So, if anybody's from the FBI is listening, do not look at my search history.
Oh, you did it again. I'm sold on that one too, so I'll have to keep an eye out for that. Thanks for talking to me, man.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This was great catching up, man. It was wonderful seeing you last year at Scares That Care, and I hope sometime in the near future we can all see each other in person again.
Yeah, we got to make that happen. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.